I want to feel surprised if I see garbage in the lake. I'd love to go to a lake that's clean and healthy and that I'm not afraid of swimming in. And I think by using my voice to raise awareness about this issue, I'm hoping that other people will feel the same way and that they'll want to protect the lake too. I'm Rochelle Byrne, and I'm the founder and executive director of A Greener Future. A Greener Future is an environmental nonprofit focused on litter cleanup and prevention. Before I started the Love Your Lake program, I didn't know a lot about Lake Ontario and I hadn't visited all that often. But now that I've been to over 100 locations along the shoreline and I get to come back year after year, I've really created a strong bond with the lake, and I feel like it's up to me to try and use my voice to help protect it. Lake Ontario is drinking water to over 9 million people. It's an important spot for people to enjoy the beach. A lot of people go swimming and kayaking, boating, fishing, paddleboarding in Lake Ontario, and it's also a place where a lot of people work. So protecting Lake Ontario is really important to me, and by doing litter cleanups along the shores of Lake Ontario, we have the opportunity to engage communities that are all connected by one thing, the lake. Love Your Lake is generally 100 litter cleanups along the shores of Lake Ontario. Each year we have about 500 volunteers come join us, but this year, because of COVID-19, we had to make some changes. We couldn't host public cleanups, so we decided to do something that would be more interactive online. So I paddleboarded from Kingston all the way to Niagara on the lake to raise awareness about plastic pollution.
There was a lot of uncertainty when the pandemic hit. At the beginning, everyone was in lockdown. I mean, businesses were closed, people were out of work, and it was a really scary time. And we had no idea if we'd be able to run the programs that we had planned to run this year. In the beginning, public places like beaches and parks were all closed. We were being encouraged to stay inside, only go outside for walks or if you need to go grocery shopping. You weren't allowed to see your friends and family, so you certainly wouldn't be able to come out to a public litter cleanup. It was unprecedented and nobody really knew how things would turn out. The pandemic first hit in March and Love Your Lake was supposed to begin at the beginning of May. In that short space of time, things were changing constantly, sometimes by the hour, sometimes by the day. The reality of last week was not the reality of the week you were living in. But as it went on and as things got worse, it became clear that this thing wasn't going away anytime soon and that we were going to have to adjust our programs accordingly. Usually when we have hundreds of people come out to our cleanups, we can pick up over 100,000 pieces of litter in just 2 months. And that's why our Love Your Lake program is so important. But this year, without being able to have that volunteer power, we were struggling to find a way that we could still make the biggest impact possible under the conditions of the pandemic. We knew we had to do something big, so that's when Rochelle came up with the idea to paddle across Lake Ontario. At first, the idea seemed a little out of the box, but that's the point. If we couldn't pick up as much litter as we usually do, we needed to find another way to really make a difference and to really bring people's attention to this issue. By doing this big endurance challenge, we knew we'd be able to get the attention not only from our followers on Instagram and Facebook, but also from the media. She started doing TV interviews and radio interviews, and it gave her the opportunity not only to discuss this big paddle journey she was doing, but she could also talk about plastic pollution in Lake Ontario. By doing this, she was able to bring this issue to a whole new audience, to people who have never heard of a greener future or who have never considered that there could be plastic pollution in Lake Ontario. We know firsthand how much litter is out there, so we knew that if we could do it safely, we still wanted to get out there and pick up as much litter as we could. Normally, when people come out to our litter cleanups, we really emphasize education. So not only do we show people how much litter is actually out there, we talk to them about where it's coming from and how we can stop it. So throughout the project, while Rochelle was paddling, myself and our team would be on the shore doing litter cleanups, and we would be taking photos of everything, taking videos of everything, doing Instagram stories, and recording all of the data about the things we were finding so that we could still educate people about plastic pollution in Lake Ontario, but we were just doing it virtually.
I started paddling on Canada Day, which was July 1st in Kingston, Ontario. Thank you. I'll see you when we get to the park with you. See you at Lake Ontario Park, okay? All right. Love you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye, buddy.
It's day one out on Lake Ontario. The weather conditions could not be better. It is beautiful, warm, not too windy. We're just heading out of Kingston towards Bath, and we're excited to get this journey started on such a wonderful day. It was a really exciting launch day. I was nervous because I knew how big of a project this was, and I had no idea how it was gonna go or how difficult it would be at that point. So I was really nervous, but also very excited, and I was happy that my husband wanted to join me for the first day. So I think by the end of that day, he kind of knew what I was in for, and he didn't come out again for a little while. I think it was a really good start because it showed me how enjoyable the whole experience was going to be, but also that it was going to be a big challenge, and it's something that I really had to get in the right mindset for. making sure that I could do this in the most safe way possible was really important. So that's something that I really had to think about, because I definitely didn't want to come in contact with the virus or spread the virus if I did come in contact with it. The logistics were probably the hardest part of planning all this, just because the weather can be so unpredictable, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't paddling on really windy days or really wavy days, and I obviously didn't want to be in the water if there was a chance of a thunderstorm. So I had to be very careful about choosing which days I was going to paddle. I was constantly looking at the weather, and it took a lot of planning just to figure out where I was going to get in and out of the water as well. I wanted to make sure that I was getting in and out in a place that was public and safe to do so. So that was boat launches and public parks and beaches. A lot of times what we found was that some of the beaches were closed, but it didn't say so on Google Maps or even online. So it's one of those situations where you don't really know until you get there. And that was one of the things that definitely brought some excitement to the project. So after getting through Kingston, I traveled kind of like along through Bath and Greater Napanee, and then I ended up going through the Bay of Quinte. And I chose to do that because the outside edge of Prince Edward County can be very rough and very windy, and I didn't want to risk being stuck in that kind of weather. So I chose to go through the Bay of Quinte, which was great and beautiful, but it was also very challenging. I had to cross a lot of open water. So there was some areas that were really wavy. There was some winds that were blowing against me. And there was a period where I had to paddle really hard for about 5 hours straight. And that's something that I probably never want to do again. There was a day where it looked like it was going to be really good weather, but then a pop-up rain shower came down on me, and it was raining so hard I had to duck under some willow trees that were along the shore. It's an absolute downpour out here. I've come under this nice willow to try and get out of the rain a little bit, but it's not really doing the trick. No thunder, at least. It looks like it's just a big cloud that is hopefully passing over kind of quickly. Thank goodness for dry bags. Yeah, it was kind of surprising because I definitely didn't see it coming, but it was all part of the experience, and it's definitely going to be something that's more memorable for me, for sure. I'm still having fun.
Hello.
Hello.
How's it going? How are ya?
Good. That's the line to get on the ferry, right?
Yeah, but we couldn't get to a parking lot down there if we wanted to.
There she is.
How was it?
Yeah.
Good.
A bit of rain.
Surprisingly, considering there is a downpour, and
Did it last long?
probably by like half an hour.
Okay. Did you just wait it out?
Yeah. We also did litter cleanups along the way. So I picked up garbage from the lake as I was paddling, but I also had my team on the shore doing litter cleanups kind of as we passed by so that we could pick up as much garbage from the shoreline and from the lake during our program, even though we didn't have as much volunteer support as we would usually have.
Today we're in Scarborough doing a litter cleanup at this small beach here on the shores of Lake Ontario. So this beach isn't very well known, and because of that it's not really maintained. So I expect that we'll pick up a lot of litter today. You can see that right here on the edge of the shoreline, there's a lot of plastic accumulation. It looks like these plastic pieces were washed up from the lake when the water levels were higher, and now they're just sitting here. When the water levels become high again, there's a very good chance that if all of this plastic is left here, it could get washed back into the lake and where it could break down into microplastics. There's so much here. This is a really good example. It's obviously broken off of a larger plastic item and it will just continue to break down if it ends up back in the lake. Plastic, cigarette butt. So this is a plastic bottle cap. We find a lot more of these than we find the actual plastic bottles, and that's because the bottles will fill up with water and sink to the bottom of the lake, whereas these plastic bottle caps, they float, so then they'll wash up on our shores. So here we have a plastic fork. This is the perfect example of single-use plastics because somebody would have used this for maybe 20 or 30 minutes and then threw it away. Here we have a plastic flosser, plastic piece, cigarette butt. So here we have another piece of a plastic bottle cap. These really worry me because birds can get their beaks stuck in these, smaller animals might get caught in them, so we really need to keep these out of our environment. Piece of a plastic cup, can, plastic lid, paper cup, plastic straw. Okay, so here we have a chunk of foam. We still don't really know how some of it ends up here, but it's a huge problem when something like this ends up in the environment because it just breaks down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. Like foam especially just breaks down into these like teeny tiny little pieces, and it's so hard to clean up. And it's also very easy for animals to ingest those pieces by accident. So really need to keep this away from the lake.
I came around a bend and I got my first sight of the CN Tower. By that point, I was already more than halfway. It was really exciting because I knew that I was gonna make it at that point. As I got closer to the GTA, I did notice there was more litter in the water, including raw sewage. So there were some areas where I was passing tampons and condoms and chunks of compacted toilet paper, and that was probably from a sewage bypass that had happened locally. When there's a big storm, a lot of times the sewage plants will release the sewage raw into the lake because they don't want it to back up into people's homes and they just can't process the water and the sewage fast enough. Letting the sewage go is I guess the best way for them to do it, but it can cause a lot of harm. It causes E. coli levels to shoot up and also leaves a lot of debris from people flushing things down the toilet. I'm officially in Toronto. That's Rouge Beach behind me. Going through Toronto was one of the highlights of my whole experience. And I think that's because I got to meet some amazing people and do something a little different. So I portaged twice in Toronto, which is something that I've never done before. And I also had 2 groups join me. So I had the Lake Surfistas and Toronto Island SUP come out and paddle with me.
See y'all later.
See ya.
Yeah, there's definitely some areas where I feel like I'm paddling through caramel because it's so hard, and then I'll get out of it and I can start ripping off again. So
So you get that little eddy current back. But learning to figure out how to work with the lake or work with the water is no one can teach you that really.
No.
You have to figure it out.
Yeah. For the very first day I paddled with my husband, and then when I paddled with him the other day, I could tell how much I had improved compared to how hard he was struggling. Because on the first day we were both kind of struggling, but now I can get through it. So it's crazy. It was really nice to get to know new people and pick up litter together and paddle together and just take everything in. That was definitely one of the greatest highlights of the trip. I was really surprised at how much wildlife I did see when I was traveling along the shore. Every day I ended up seeing different species. And I think one of the best experiences I had was when I was leaving Toronto and a colony of cormorants was flying by me. That was definitely one of the most memorable experiences. Along with all the wildlife that I saw, I also did see some things that were pretty concerning. While I was picking up litter out of the water, there was also some things that I couldn't clean up. So there was some areas where there was slime on the water. There were some areas that were really smelly. I did see a lot of algae blooms, and I saw a lot of dead fish. I actually ended up seeing more dead fish than living fish throughout the whole experience. When we do a litter cleanup, it's more than just picking up garbage. So we do pick up the garbage and we sort it and we try and put it to where it's supposed to go. So we recycle as much as we can. But it's also to teach our volunteers about the type of items that we're finding. We collect data on everything that we pick up. And this helps us explain what the problem items are and come up with solutions to tackle those items.
Since the Greener Future started in 2014, we've picked up more than 1.5 million pieces of litter. So that just goes to show how much litter is out there and also how important it is to collect data. Through our data, we know that the 3 most common things we find on our beaches are cigarette butts, plastic pieces, and foam pieces.
When cigarette butts are littered onto the ground further from the lake, it doesn't take much for them to end up and travel down into the lake. A big rainstorm or even wind can carry them into ditches or sewers, and then eventually they get washed right into the lake. Throwing cigarette butts on the ground is one of the only socially accepted forms of littering. There's still a lot of people that throw butts on the ground and don't think it's a problem. They either don't realize that they're made of plastic and they're not going to go away, or it's just a habit and they don't even think about it anymore. So there's literally trillions of cigarette butts ending up on the ground every year around the world. And it's really concerning because not only are those filters made of plastic, but they also contain harmful chemicals that are from the cigarette itself. So when those end up in the water, all those chemicals can leach out. And then as the cigarette butt breaks down in the water, it can also release microplastics. And a lot of times it gets mistaken for food by birds and fish. I'm really concerned about microplastics ending up in Lake Ontario, mainly because it's something that we can't see. And when we can't see it, it makes it really hard to come up with solutions. Microplastics can't easily be filtered out of water. And if we can't see them, we don't always know they're there without doing a significant amount of testing. And testing can also be expensive. So when you go to the lake, if it looks pretty clean, and you're swimming in there, but you're also swimming with billions of microplastics, how healthy is that? It can be kind of scary because we don't necessarily have any solutions at this point. And microplastics can come from a variety of sources. So one is cigarette filters. Also from synthetic clothing. When we do our laundry, microplastics can break off and get washed into our water systems. And also plastic that ends up in the lake as it degrades and breaks down. Little pieces of plastic break off and they just get smaller and smaller. They never really go away. So with so many different sources of microplastics coming together and ending up in the lake, it's really hard to come up with one solution that would stop all this microplastic pollution.
Plastic, foam. Oh, I see Nurdles. If I just look closely enough at the sand, I can find all sorts of microplastics. This is just from one area, and you can see that we have some plastic fragments that have broken off of larger plastic items. We have foam. And we have a Nurdle here. Nurdles are small plastic pellets that are used by manufacturers to produce new plastic items. So a company will order thousands of these small Nurdles, these plastic pellets, and then they'll melt them down and create new plastic items out of that. So now I'm just sifting the sand to see if I can find any more microplastics. You can see some Nurdles in there. There's some
bigger plastic pieces in this one that were buried in the sand. And this one. More Nurdles.
I guess the biggest problem with Nurdles is that they're easy to spill. They're shipped in large quantities, and when they spill, they are nearly impossible to clean up. When Nurdles spill, they can end up in our waterways. They can get washed into Lake Ontario, they can flow out into the ocean. They'll also wash up on beaches, and they're a huge hazard for wildlife because they're so small, and they can easily be mistaken as food, and animals can ingest them.
So we just sifted through the sand at this beach for about 20 minutes or so, and we found hundreds and hundreds of plastic pieces, including lots of microplastics.
So we don't really know what the health effects of microplastics are at this point. There's a lot of research being done, but we don't have any conclusive results yet, which can be kind of concerning because microplastics are kind of all around us at this point, and it would be really nice to know what the damage is that they're doing, and hopefully that would allow us to come up with solutions quicker and put more funding into finding those solutions. Plastic is a material that just doesn't easily go away. And once it's in the lake, it breaks up into smaller pieces. It can be hazardous to wildlife, and it contains toxins. So because it's made of oil, it can actually attract more chemicals and toxins to it, making it more poisonous than what it would be just on its own. So items that sit in the lake for a long time, they become more and more hazardous to people and to wildlife and to the environment in general. So plastic is definitely something that we want to keep out of the natural environment, and reducing plastic use is probably the best way to do it. I think any amount of plastic in the lake is too much.
Plastic pollution in Lake Ontario affects not only the local communities, but the world essentially. All of the Great Lakes are connected. It starts with Lake Superior to the north, and then it flows down through all of the Great Lakes into Lake Ontario. And Lake Ontario is the last stop for all the other Great Lakes. So any plastic or anything that gets dropped in Lake Superior, let's say, has the potential to make its way down all the way to Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario also feeds into the St. Lawrence River, and the St. Lawrence River feeds into the Atlantic Ocean. So again, if we drop, let's say, a plastic straw in Lake Ontario, it's very possible that it could make its way from one side of Lake Ontario to the other, out through the St. Lawrence and out into the Atlantic Ocean. And so now not only is the litter that we drop near Lake Ontario affecting our local wildlife and our local community and affecting our drinking water, it's now also getting spat out into the ocean and contributing to plastic pollution on a much larger scale and affecting who knows how many people.
After I got past Toronto, the whole project seemed to wrap up pretty quickly. I had a few days of bad weather that kind of slowed me down, but once I got on the water, I was able to go pretty good distances. The last day was really exciting. I woke up, I was actually really nervous because I really didn't know what to expect. The day before had been really windy and the waters were really rough, but on the last day, the weather couldn't have been better. Mike dropped me off at Jones Beach in St. Catharines, and the water was really calm. I started paddling out. Mike drove to the end at Queens Royal Park, and he got in the water there and paddled towards me. So I was paddling for about 2 hours, and then I saw him kind of pop around a corner, and that's when I knew I was getting really close, which was awesome. He told me that I had about 3.5 kilometers left to go. So at that point, we actually slowed down a little bit to try and make it last a little bit longer. And we just really enjoyed having that time together and paddling towards the end. So as we got closer to Niagara-on-the-Lake, we passed Ryerson Park that we usually do cleanups at, and there was a bunch of people there, and I got to wave to them. And then we passed a golf course, and then just after the golf course is Queens Royal Park, where that was the grand finale.
Congrats. Well done.
There was lots of people in the park. My family was there, so they cheered me on as I paddled in, and of course my crew was there. It was a really nice ending, and I think at that moment I was kind of in shock. Like, I couldn't really believe it was over. Litter cleanups aren't a long-term solution, but they're something that's necessary along the way. Until we can come up with solutions that reduce plastic waste or, completely replace plastic packaged items, we're going to be finding garbage on the ground and in the lake. The only way to deal with that is to pick it up. So while I'm patiently waiting for the day where we come to the beach and there's no garbage, we're gonna have to keep doing litter cleanups until we get to that point.
Before I had ever done a litter cleanup, I would have assumed that you would come to the beach, you would pick up maybe the odd coffee cup or straw or plastic bag that somebody had left behind. I did not imagine that we would be picking up thousands of pieces of litter at every single cleanup, even if we only had a team of 1 or 2 or 3 people. The scale of the problem is massive, and it's hard to believe because when you go to the beach, you might not even really notice how much is actually there. Sometimes it's kind of buried under the sand, or it's sort of scattered from one side of the beach to the other. But after you do a litter cleanup and you pile up all of the litter you've collected and you sort through it and you count it all, that's really powerful when you see all of that litter in one pile when you thought when you got to the beach that it didn't look that bad. And that happens all the time. Because we collect data on every piece of litter we pick up, we know that each year during Love Your Lake, we pick up about 80,000 to 100,000 pieces of litter. Even though we weren't able to host volunteers at our cleanups this year, our team was still able to pick up over 40,000 pieces of litter in just a couple of months. And that just goes to show that even one person can make a difference. We use these single-use items for just a short period of time, but what we don't really realize is that it had a life before we used it and it's gonna have a life after we used it. So the main problem is that we just produce too much and we consume too much. We have to think about where these items are coming from, the processes that go into making them and shipping them, and what happens to them when we're done using them. There are just so many ways that waste is ending up in the lake, and we need to start thinking about where this waste is coming from and how we can stop it at the source. Litter is really just a symptom of the overall problem. We need to transition from this throwaway culture to a circular economy, one where producers would take responsibility for the waste that they create. We would be mindful of where our products are coming from and where they end up after we use them, and one that would provide more accessible solutions for everyone to reduce their waste. I used to only think about plastic pollution in the context of the ocean. And living in Ontario, I sort of thought, well, that's a far away problem. It's not something that I have much control over. After working with A Greener Future, I realized that that's just not the case. It's shocking when you go to a beach that you used to go to as a kid and you realize it's covered in plastic. It's not a far away issue at all. It's essentially happening in our own backyards.
I think being on the lake for such an extended period of time made me feel like I don't want to be a person that just stands by and watches deterioration happen in the lake. Seeing pollution and litter and stuff in there, it's hard to see, but it's also become so commonplace that I wasn't really surprised. And I want to feel surprised if I see garbage in the lake. I'd love to go to a lake that's clean and healthy and that I'm not afraid of swimming in. And I think by using my voice to raise awareness about this issue, I'm hoping that other people will feel the same way and that they'll want to protect the lake too, because there are a lot of people that want to come down to the beach and go swimming, but when there's advisories against swimming, it's really sad and it's frustrating, and it doesn't have to be that way. There are tons of ways that anyone can help make the environment a better and more sustainable place. If you're an individual, you can attend an event, you can go to a litter cleanup, or just do some independent study to learn more about the environment. Also making donations to organizations that are fighting for the environment, trying to get involved in your community, and just speaking up is so important when it comes to supporting different environmental initiatives. There's definitely a lot that needs to be done by the government as well. The government is supposed to be our collective voice. So one thing that you can do that's very important is vote for candidates that are supporting the things that you want to support. There's always so much going on. Sometimes the environment can kind of get pushed to the side, and that's one thing that we can't let happen. We have to make sure that we keep the environment in the forefront, since it's all around us all the time and our health relies on it. Every little action counts, and adding those up can mean a lot for the environment, especially long term. It's really concerning that the amount of pollution in Lake Ontario keeps rising. I really don't know what the lake is going to look like for future generations if we don't take action now. It's a lot easier to clean up the mess now than to wait another 10, 20 years when it's really, really, really bad and try and fix it then. So I think prevention is the best method. We don't want the lake getting any more polluted than it is now, and we want to take action to actually clean it up so that we can leave it even better than it is now for future generations.
closing thoughts about Lake Ontario?
I just really hope Lake Ontario is going to be okay. I hope a lot of people are fighting for it. If everyone can just do their part and, do something, it'll make a really big impact. I didn't get injured. That was good.
Did you fall in?
No, I didn't even fall in once. My whole streak, my whole life, I haven't fallen yet.
Good.